All right, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Dr. Jaclyn Siano. I am one of the directors here at Inspired Instruction, and this is our webinar on preparing for the revised New Jersey Student Learning Standards for English and Math. So there's quite a lot that I'm going to be covering. There are a decent amount of changes, so this is going to be a very informative session. If you have questions, you can absolutely put them in the chat. I will stop at different points after the ELA section, after the math section, to discuss anything that you may have specific questions about. You can hang on after and I can answer those questions then as well, whatever is most comfortable for you. But I'm going to get started, and we are recording this just so we can put it up for people who are not able to attend. So our agenda for today is talking about the major revisions, which happen to be in ELA and Math, and then specifically towards the end, talking about what can we do as administrators, as teachers, to prepare for these as they are coming down the pike. So I think the first important thing to note is where the major revisions are, and they are in K through 12 ELA and K through 12 Math. And keeping in mind that these are technically right now the technical revisions, which means they have not been fully adopted yet. New Jersey has not given a specific timeline as to when the final ones are going to be published, but I do know that they just kind of finished all of their town hall style meetings last week, which was to get feedback from the community and from educators. So I'm thinking they're probably in the stage right now where they are wrapping things up. And hopefully, if they want them to be adopted in 2023, I'm hoping they should have them out by the summer. But the technical revisions are very, very specific. They are significantly more difficult to read than the regular published ones because it shows in brackets what's been deleted, what's been added, what's been edited. So I'm hoping that this webinar today is really time saving for you because it is a lot to go through. So I'm hoping to hit all the highlights today in terms of what are the major things that are coming down the pike for ELA and Math learning standards. All right, so the first big thing is climate change, which I think everybody who has seen the revised standards for all the other content areas, we kind of had an inkling that this was going to be coming down the pike for both ELA and Math as well. So ELA and Math are going to have climate change standards integrated into them, just like the other content areas do. So all the content areas that were revised for 2020, they all have climate change standards, whether it is by band or by grade. In this case, since the majority of the standards are by grade level, they are specific to grades. So you'll have, kindergarten math climate change standards, you'll have second grade ELA climate change standards, and they are but they are in both content areas, math and English. The other thing is there's obviously a big push for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you will see a lot of the changes, even though the standards themselves, some of the concepts may stay the same, they definitely have changed the wording in a lot of them to make sure that we're highlighting the contributions of people with diverse abilities, cultures, and perspectives. There's also a big push for technology integration. And I think that is coming off of COVID. They want to make sure that, we are using multiple means of media to be teaching. So you'll definitely see some integration of that as well. So with key areas of change, I'm going to divide this up into two sections. First, I'm going to talk about the changes in ELA, and there are significantly more changes in ELA, or I should say more major changes in ELA than there are in Math. At the end of the ELA section, I will open up to see if anybody has any questions. If you think of something as I'm talking, please put it in the chat and I can answer it. So we're going to overview the K through 12 ELA proposed changes. And again, please remember these are proposed changes, nothing set in stone right now. Right now, it's technically, the technical revision. So it's not published, no final draft yet. But I can't imagine too much is going to change from what they have now. And then after this, we'll switch over and we'll talk to them about the math, and then we'll talk about what we can be doing as educators to kind of prepare for this as this comes, down the pike. All right, so with ELA, there's a couple of things that are across all ELA sections, K through 12, all subsections. Like I mentioned before, this big digital shift. So since the last time the ELA standards were revised, which was 2016, obviously education has changed significantly since then. So the state has decided to make sure that as they revise the language of the standards, that they focus on the use of multimodal formats, using technology for text sets, and making sure that students are able to synthesize across diverse formats. So you'll definitely see some wording in the standards that have changed to focus on that. And as I mentioned before, climate change and this little symbol is being used in the ELA and the math standards. Anytime there is a climate change relevant standard, you'll see that little hand holding a leaf to say that this is a climate change standard. And like I mentioned before, there are climate change standards in K through 12. And again, they are clearly noted. From what I saw as I was going through the very detailed technical revisions, it's nothing crazy. It's a lot of, in K to 5, it's if you're teaching other subjects, how it can be integrated with science. And then as you get to the older grades, it's more of, as a writing topic, as a speaking topic, as a research topic. So it's more about, using climate change as a foundation to cover the standards. One of the other big changes for ELA is they really made a push to modify redundant standards. If you remember from the ones that we're currently using, the 2016, there are definitely some standards within the same grade level that are very, very similar. So they did try to get rid of any major redundancy, and they really tried to make it more as like a staircase. So, one standard in grade, 1, the next one in grade 2, like they're not redundant. They build off of each other. So they definitely focused on developing complexity as you proceed through the grade levels. They also added ELA practices. So a lot of other content areas that were revised also have practices. Social studies has practices, career readiness, life literacy, and key skills has practices. So the creating of an ELA set of practices makes sense because it very much follows the format of the most recently revised standards for the other content areas. And, the purpose of the practices is basically to say, students who have progressed from kindergarten to grade 12 ELA in New Jersey are able to be proficient in these things. And it focuses really on literacy, being able to read deeply, creating your own work, listening and speaking. And again, as I said, they really focused on making it more of a scaffolded staircase approach so that you cannot really do first grade work or standards until you master the kindergarten standards. So they did add these practices, which, my big focus at Inspired Instruction is curriculum. I do a lot of work with schools revising and auditing curriculum. I always recommend including the practices for other content areas when you revise curriculum. So I would absolutely make that recommendation as well when you go to revise your ELA curriculum, is to make sure the practices are included as well. Based on in unit 1 of grade 2, we cover these practices because I do think it is really important to make everything connected. They also created a vision for ELA and literacy education. It focuses really on the needs for scaffolding, multi-language learning, a lot about culturally responsive practices. So as I mentioned in the beginning, that's that big push for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it really talks about the goal of how are we creating students who are ready for college and careers, and how are we going to develop their skills to make them productive global citizens. So the vision pretty much outlines, I think if you look at it very closely, it really justifies why they made the changes they did in the revised standards. Another big thing is they got rid of the companion standards. So there were companion standards for reading and writing for grades 6 through 12, and they were for history, and then they had science and technical subjects. So those have completely gone away now. So there will no longer be companion standards in the 2023 ELA standards. Instead, what they've done was to decrease the redundancy. They've taken those concepts and built them right into the RI standards and the writing standards. So instead of having separate, it's just all integrated into the actual core standards now. So that's a big one. They also did some work on restructuring the framework of how the standards are categorized. So in 2016, if you look at the top box, we had reading, writing, language, speaking and listening, then we had foundational, and then we had companion standards. And then if you look at 2023, they've kind of combined that into just 4 main categories. So reading, which is still literary text and informational text, writing, speaking and listening really had no changes. And then they took those foundational skills and put them under language. So those foundational skills are no longer under reading or writing, respectively. They are under the language section. So the language domain is now, your regular language, like vocabulary, things like that. And in K-5, your language domain also has your foundational skills. So that was a big shift, is to make sure that you understand that now it will be, instead of just RF, reading foundational, it will be L.RF. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. So that was definitely a big shift. All right, so let's talk just about the reading standards for a minute. So there's new codings for reading. So reading has always been RI for reading informational and RL for reading literary texts. That same beginning still exists, but now they've added subdomains. So CR for close reading of text, CI for central ideas and themes of text, IT, interactions among text elements, TS for text structure, PP for perspective and purpose in text, MF for diverse media and formats, that's that big shift to digital, AA for analysis of an argument, and CT for comparison of text. So if you look at this example that I have in the pink box, this is a first grade reading informational text standard. It's not too dissimilar in terms of concept from what the RI standard was before, but they've added that MF, which means this specifically speaks to diverse media and formats. And they've added some more descriptive things. So it has to do with diagrams, tables, animations. It also talks about connection. So in a science unit, this would be one that you could connect to climate change. So they definitely, in their attempt to reduce redundancy, and I really do think they did a good job on that, they made each standard more specific, but also provided a lot more examples on how it can be implemented. All right, with writing, we do have new coding for writing as well. So writing used to just be W dot grade level dot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now what we have is the subdomains. So AW speaks to argumentative writing, IW for informative and explanatory writing, NW for narrative writing, WP for writing process, WR for writing research, SE for sources of evidence, and RW for ranges of writing. Again, not dissimilar from what we had before, just more specific in the coding. So we always had a standard in writing for writing arguments, but now instead of just being W dot grade level dot 1, it's W dot AW argumentative writing dot grade level dot 1. And you also see that they added things like textual and non-textual evidence. And that's what I mentioned before, that shift to digital formats, using more media in the classroom, video clips, audio clips, things like that. So we do have new coding for writing. Again, the standards themselves varies. You're still going to have all the things that you had before, but there is more integration, because especially at the higher grades, since they got rid of those companion writing standards, they did try to put a lot of those concepts into the regular writing standards so that things are covered in regards to writing, technical text, writing historical text, things like that. So it's just a lot of combination. So as I mentioned before, language probably had the biggest shift because now the foundational skills are under the language domain. So with K-5, we have foundational writing, which is brand new, underneath the language domain. So early writing foundations is really focused on your sound letter basics, on spelling, grammar, developing writing skills, sentence composition. So this is a new section, and it is going to be called WF for foundational skills writing language. So it will look something like this. Like I mentioned before, we used to have, foundational skills. Now we have them separated by writing and by reading. and they're all under the language domain instead of under the reading domain. So for L.WF, and remember, this is only from grades K to 5, you have foundational skills for writing language. So sound letter basics, spelling, sentence compositions, grammar, syntax, punctuation. So this standard should look very familiar because this is almost word for word what it was before, but it was someplace else. And now it's been recoded and moved into language. And specifically into language, foundational skills, writing language. And the foundational reading skills, those existed before. Again, they've been moved from the reading domain to the language domain. And they really did bolster these, and they made these significantly more explanatory and focused on decoding and encoding, awareness of segmentation, accuracy, fluency, and comprehension of reading, inferential vocabulary, that kind of stuff. So they really did, those K to 5 foundational reading skills have also been really built up and become much more specific and provided. I think it's more helpful because they have more examples of what it means and how it could be implemented in the curriculum. So again, for language, you now have language. L.WF is for grades K to 5, foundational writing skills. And then you have L.RF, which is reading foundational skills, again, only for K through 5. So L.RF, foundational skills, reading language. So again, this used to formerly be under the reading section. Now it's under the language section. You'll see what I was talking about, the stuff in the bold. That's the stuff that was added. And I just think it makes it much more specific and easier. As someone who's a curriculum writer, I look at this and say, okay, so anytime they're covering decodable texts or, one-to-one letter sounds, this is a standard that would be covered. So I definitely think it makes it easier as a curriculum person. So it's all the stuff that was covered in the foundational skills in 2016, except now it's in a different section. So print concepts, awareness, phonics, word recognition, fluency, all the same stuff, just more specific, more detailed in the language section. Now for everybody else in the language section, so everyone who doesn't have foundational skills, and for K through 5 as well, so we're talking about the regular language skills, not the foundational language skills. There is also a new coding system for that. The standards are pretty similar to what they were before. Again, you have some bolded stuff, like this is an 8th grade one, and you can see that how they combine the companion standards, including technical meanings. That was something that was in the companion standards for RST, but now they've combined it. So for language for K through 12, again, not foundational skills, the new coding is you have SS for system and structure of language, KL for knowledge of language, WL for vocabulary acquisition, use, but literal meaning, and then WI for vocabulary acquisition, use for interpretive meaning. So this is an example of an 8th grade language standard for VL, which is literal meaning of vocabulary. Again, the wording, if you look at the beginning, determine and clarify the meaning of unknown and multiple meaning words, that was always there. They've just added some more depth into there to cover the companion standards that they got rid of. And speaking and listening pretty much went unchanged in terms of the actual standards themselves. What they did do was they added coding. So you can see everybody has coding now. Just like when they revised the other content areas, everybody got coding. ELA, same way, now we have codes as well. So the standards themselves pretty much stayed the same from K through 12, but we have the substandard of PE, which is participate effectively, II, which is integrate information, ES, which is evaluate speakers, P, which is present information, UM, which is use media, and AS, which is adapt speech. So again, all of these standards existed before, and now they're just categorized into one of those subdomains. So this is an example of a grade 7 one, include multimedia components. So it's the same standard that it was. Now we just have, a little subdomain for it so we can easily look at it and know specifically what practice it attaches to, what part of the ELA mission does it attach to. It's just much more specific. All right, so before I hop into the math section, does anybody have any questions about the ELA revisions? And again, that's the short version of me going through 300 pages of technical revisions and kind of summarizing it all. So if anybody has any questions, you can unmute or you can put it in chat. Or if you want to, you can wait till the end, whatever works for you. All righty. Oh, I do see will we be receiving this presentation? So we are not going to be sharing the presentation slides. However, we will be sharing a one-pager with you that has the links to all the technical standards revisions and a whole bunch of other really helpful resources. So thank you for asking that, Dana. All right, let's move on to math. So math had not as many significant changes. Still changes, but not as many, and because they already had categories, they already had subdomains. English never had that. So math is not as big of a systems overhaul as ELA is. So with math, the first big change is they took the word fluency and they replaced it with accuracy and efficiency. So this focus is really saying that it is more important to be accurate and efficient than it is to be fluent in something. So you'll see if you look at the example of the kindergarten standard, it used to be demonstrate fluency. Now it's demonstrate accuracy and efficiency. So really just fluency and fluently got taken out, accuracy and efficiency got put in instead. We also have the addition of the climate change standards. In every grade, K through 12 math will have at least one climate change standard. Again, you know they're climate change standards because they're set off by that little symbol with the hand holding the leaf. And again, they're not crazy because I know people had asked me, oh my gosh, how are they going to put climate change into math? That's going to be, you know, so difficult. It's really more about like the data stuff. So if you're looking at data, you're analyzing data, make that data about climate change. If we're doing word problems, maybe they're about climate change. And then some of them are almost precursors to learning about climate change in science. So for example, you know, you may need to know that plants need light and water, and that relates to climate change. And then maybe you're doing some kind of math problem around that. So you're teaching climate change, but not always directly in math. It's more of building the skills so that you can cover it in other places like science. So do not panic about the climate change issue. It is not as scary as some people think it is. All right, so let's talk about elementary math first and the changes in the K through 5 domains. So the only big shift was instead of having measurement and data like we had before, they've split it into 2 sections. So measurement and data used to be one, now it is measurement and data literacy. And the push behind incorporating data literacy is, you know, we really want students to look through that lens and be able to discuss and respond to database questions, you know, making sense of the world, integrating, you know, mathematics into other, you know, technological topics, you know, being able to formulate statistical questions, collect and analyze the data, communicate their findings. So it's really more building that real world capacity. So that's why measurement and data is now split. So we have MD, which was measurement and data, is now M for measurement and DL for data literacy. So if you look, for example, 1.M.A, that would be your measurement standard, and 1.DL.A would be your data literacy standard. So it's just literally they took them and split them so that they are more specific to just measurement and just data literacy instead of being split. They also introduced some new standards specifically for word problems involving money. So in kindergarten and grade 1 specifically, there are specific standards now that have to do with working with money and have to do with working with money through word problems. So being able to, you know, compare the values of coins and dollars, understanding monetary denominations, and really making sure that they're doing it in a real world authentic way. So you have a new kindergarten standard, and then you have 2 new standards for first grade under that measurement section. So it's, you know, grade 1, M for measurement, and then working with money happens to be one of the new subdomains now. And then in middle school, we have just a couple of changes, nothing hugely major. So they have included some more foundational work with radicals in the middle school level because they want to prepare students better for advanced math courses. So the goal behind this is, adding some clarifications around radicals so that they are better prepared for Algebra 1. So it's really just, they took some of the standards and you can see like in the blue what they added. And it's really just making it a little more specific in hopes that if we cover those standards in middle school, they will be better prepared for Algebra 1 in high school. So that was really it for middle school specific, was just adding more about radicals to better prepare students for Algebra 1. In high school math, not a ton of stuff for high school math either. They wanted to make sure that there was additional standards that pretty much are like the bonus standards. Like we should be pushing for these standards in order to push for data literacy, in order to prepare for, if students who are going to go to pre-calc, because not all students are going to go to pre-calc and statistics or data science. So these are what they call the plus standards. So you'll see in my little pink box, there's literally a plus sign in parentheses next to these standards. So these are additional standards that can be clustered into current courses, and they will be clustered into those advanced math courses. So this, this might be covered in a statistics class, but not in any of Algebra 1, Algebra 2 geometry. So they're kind of the additional standards for advanced math. So if you do teach an advanced math class at the high school level, these are the standards that you're most likely going to be integrating. And it's, again, really just trying to get a more comprehensive feel for all of the advanced math courses, not just the ones that are required for graduation. All right, does anybody have any questions on the math revisions? Definitely not as much for math as there is for ELA. All right, so let's talk about what can be done to prepare for these updates. So like I mentioned before, I do a lot of work with inspired instruction for curriculum. We work with schools to do auditing, revision, writing, pretty much everything. So I know that I'm going to be writing and revising a lot of curriculum over the summer for schools once these new standards are released. So let's think about, from a curriculum perspective, from administrator perspective, what can we do to prepare for these updates? What's the best course of action? So the first thing is to definitely go in and review the proposed changes, specifically for the grade levels in which you are in charge. So I gave you a very general overview of all the major revisions. If you are an elementary school principal, you're going to want to go in and look at the K through 5 specific, what changed in kindergarten ELA, what changed in grade 1 ELA. If you are a high school science supervisor, high school math supervisor, you're going to want to go in and just look at the changes to high school math. So that's step one, is definitely over the summer when you have some free time, maybe over Memorial Day weekend, if you have some free time, go in, look at the actual technical revisions for each ELA and math. You will be getting the links to these as well after the webinar. So you definitely can go in and check those out and see what are the major changes, and then compare that to your current curriculum. What are we missing? What's been added that I'm going to have to add that does not exist? So especially with the measurement standards, and no more MD. Where do I put in the M stuff? Where do I put in the data literacy stuff? So it's really going to be comparing what you currently have to what the changes what changes need to be made. The other thing is, because I do so much work with curriculum and I do a lot of it in bulk, the Curriculum Audit Checklist is something I created for myself and my team to use as we review curriculum. It basically goes through all the things that CUSAC requires, all the things that the state requires, and you can use it literally unit by unit and say, okay, grade 3 ELA unit 1, does it have this? Does it speak to the mandates? Does it include career readiness? Are the standards updated? And I think especially if you have teachers or a curriculum team, this is something that's really helpful because it streamlines the process and everybody's working off of one document, and it is completely comprehensive and completely up to date with all the CUSAC and state standards, so nothing is missed. So when we audit curriculum for schools, this is what we use. And it really is helpful because it gives you a visual of, oh no, I don't have computer science and design thinking standards integrated into ELA, or I didn't cover Amistad law anywhere. So it is a really, really helpful thing. So next step is I would love for you to fill out this Google form. I am going to put it in the chat. And then we'll definitely follow up with everybody over the next couple of days. And what you'll get in a follow-up is the link to the proposed changes. We also have a summary sheet that talks about the proposed changes for both ELA and math. We have climate change useful resources. So now that climate change is going to be integrated into ELA and math, it is helpful to think about how are we going to do that. We also have a diversity, equity, and inclusion helpful resources sheet, which we'll share as well. And we will share the curriculum audit checklist, the download, because again, I think that's really, really helpful. It just simplifies the process, especially when you have multiple people working on it. And listen, if you don't have the capacity to revise and audit your curriculum on your own, that's what we do as well. So you absolutely can reach out if you have any questions. My email address is up here. If you want to stay on and ask other questions, you absolutely can. I'm going to turn off the recording shortly. So if you want to ask any one-on-one questions, that's great. I do hope this was helpful. And if you do need curriculum support, please do not hesitate to reach out, because that's what we're really, really good at. So thank you so much. I hope you found this helpful. I will turn off the recording, and anybody who wants to stay on and ask questions, absolutely feel free. Thank you, guys.